Welcome to the 101st episode of the Hail Married podcast. I'm A Toves, and I'm joined by my husband, the Toves. We're back to talk about UTSA basketball. Let's get started by talking about the women's team.
Okay.
The last time we talked, I think I said something very similar, but they are probably the hottest UTSA athletics program right now.
Oh, absolutely.
We're 2/3 of the way through the season, and they're 18-3, 9-1 in conference, off to the best start in school history. They're first in the American Conference. While they just had their conference winning streak ended, they still have a 12-game winning streak at the Convo. The last time we had something similar to that was an 11-game winning streak that went between the end of the 2022 and into the the end of the 2002, beginning of the 2003 season. So a very long time ago.
Yeah, and I mean they've been playing really good basketball, right? They've been, I think, better situationally, and I think that that's helped. And we'll get a little bit more into it as we talk about some of these games. But I think that's just the maturation of the team, and we've talked about it a lot, whether it's between the two of us or when we had, Coach Aston on, when we kept looking at how does this team mature, how does this team continue to get better.
This past Saturday, they matched the number of wins that they had in the previous season, 18, and we still have 8 games to go. So barring some kind of catastrophe or meltdown, I think it's pretty safe to say that Coach Aston's goal that we've heard her mention multiple times of hitting 20 wins is likely going to happen this season.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I think when she mentioned the meltdown, I think it would take, more of a catastrophe, like you said, where we have multiple players, and multiple key players get injured. I obviously right now we can't say that would happen, but that's the kind of event that would sideline this team, and really, this team is well stocked in terms of talent. So even with that, I don't know that we really couldn't weather the storm, even if they were like short-term injuries. That when I say short-term, it's like 1 week, 1.5, a week and a half or something like that. So I mean, it just really leads to the fact that something that we've talked about is this team and this year is just different.
Absolutely. And it's exciting to look at the attendance numbers for the season because they're up. We're very close in terms of average attendance between the women and the men. Typically, you see kind of a big gap between men's attendance, regardless of how the men were performing on the court. The women just always really lagged behind. And this season, they're virtually neck and neck in terms of their attendance at home. And we're starting to see a lot more attention from the media. We go to the games in the Convo, and we're starting to see the local news show up. We're starting to see people covering the team outside of the typical, people who cover the team, which usually is just Jerry Briggs, let's be honest.
Yeah.
And Joe Alexander.
Right.
So it's really exciting for the girls. I just wish that would have happened sooner and that it didn't take this really perfect season. And I know it's not exactly perfect, but this great season for the media and people to really start paying attention to what's been happening, because we've seen this trend over the last 4 years of Coach Aston's tenure here at UTSA, and these girls have been on an upward trajectory right from the beginning.
Well, I think that's part of the problem of the San Antonio sports media is that they're too focused on teams that aren't in San Antonio. So it's like, well, what are you covering? I know that ratings will get you. You're going to get ratings because of Dallas Cowboys, because of, I guess, the Longhorns. But let's be honest, you're the San Antonio sports media. You should be covering not only the pro franchise, which is the Spurs, they do, but also the college teams.
Right.
And that's UTSA. UTSA is the Division I team here in San Antonio. And I think for me, the problem is that while they're not covering UTSA, you can't even say they're covering UIW.
Right.
Not even covering even Trinity. And Trinity had some moments in past years, especially their football team, that was really good. And then UIW started a year before, UTSA, their football team, still not much. And even when they had some pretty good basketball teams, UIW wasn't really being covered. It would just
Yeah,
be like a little blip. So it's a problem just in overall in San Antonio media. I mean, Jeff Traylor has fought that too
sure.
this season. You didn't see like any of the sports media, at any of the like say weekday press conferences. So it's. I mean, I get that that we're right here saying like San Antonio sports media, you need to take a look at UTSA, but we shouldn't have to.
Yeah,
And the fact that, as you said, like this team has to have this really good season, that's really what it's been like for UTSA
sure.
sports in general. And I would also argue UIW. So I think San Antonio sports media has to do better, has to cover the area sports. And until they do so, I mean, it's a shame that that's where we got into. But here's what I wanted to ask you about the attendance, because you did bring it up. Do you think that UTSA's women's basketball attendance has increased because of, UTSA athletics having certain promotions on certain days?
You know, I wouldn't say it's necessarily just due to promotions. I'm sure that's probably helped, but I haven't seen a promotion this season that's been radically new or different from what we've seen in years past. Obviously, the fact that we are number one in the American, we're on a winning streak, and we're starting to see some additional coverage from other media outlets, I think has really contributed to people coming and watching the team. And we've said it before, these girls are exciting. They play hard, they play very physical. So if you aren't watching them right now, and maybe you're watching men's athletics or just the Spurs, the things that you like and appreciate about watching men's college basketball, professional college basketball, you're going to see that in this game with these women. I mean, they're not shying away from physicality. There are bodies flying, there is defense, there's offense. Really, it's a very complete game. It's something similar to what you would see if you've ever watched the WNBA. And I think, now with just the rise of the WNBA, people should really be paying attention to women's basketball. And we have a wonderful product on the court here. So I would just encourage anyone who's not watching UTSA to start doing it.
So I was watching Unrivaled, which is a 3-on-3, new sport that, or at least new league that essentially most of the WNBA players put together. And I'm going to use the quote that Lisa Leslie used. These beauties are beasts. I
Yep.
mean, they are. And you already summarized just how much of a beast they are. And I think that with the rise of how women's sports has really kind of captured our eyes, yesterday felt different. And I want to talk just real quick about just the crowd, because it was a family day, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that's why I wanted to ask you that question, because it was kind of going on while the women are playing. But what I saw was the lower bowl of the Convo Center, or the Convocation Center, was just, it was lit. I mean, everybody was into it. The band was doing a great job of getting, keeping the energy up.
Right.
And, I was stomping my feet, on defense, I was clapping, I would yell out some encouragement to each of the girls. And it just didn't feel like I was the only one. Because
Right.
normally in the last couple seasons, it felt like I was the only one, or you'd, say something out there.
Yeah, I would always get annoyed because when the other team was shooting free throws, I felt like I was one of the only people in the convo trying to make
Right.
noise and embarrass myself. But hey, you gotta do something to try to get in their heads, right?
Right. And I think, obviously the band made a difference, like I said, but
Right.
it felt like everybody was engaged. And to your point, it never felt like people were just leaving like they
Right.
normally do because their kid came to perform the, halftime or something. There, everybody was engaged. And the way they came back, the way they did, kind of ended up getting that win yesterday, and we'll go a little more in depth later. It was the crowd that amazed me. And that's why, again, I'm going to reiterate, that's why I wanted to ask you the question, because it felt like, yeah, now it's becoming different. So as we kind of move on here, I told you earlier, this team in this year just seems different. They look, obviously extremely focused and locked in. And I think you felt like Nina had said something just the other day in one of the pressers about that kind of capitalized or summarized this much better.
Yeah, they asked her after the game yesterday, is this what she expected when she came to UTSA? Did she expect to come here and have this winning season? And she said, to be honest, no. But then when I met the team and saw the players, and particularly she talked about the young players and how focused the young players were, how mature they were, how they practiced differently, even if they weren't, getting a lot of minutes on the court, they were very focused and they were very, dialed in practice. And she said, basically that told her this could be a really special team and a really special season.
And the one quote that they took from there, and that's why I was going to kind of setting it up here too, was the fact that, and it's highlighted when you go to goutsa.com on the women's basketball site, and it's like, we don't have bench players.
Yeah.
And as you described all that, it's just crazy to think about just 2 years ago where this team was. I mean, yes, there was some talent on the team, but there was still a lot of young players.
Mm-hmm.
And now 2 years later, those young players are now juniors. You still have Jordan around. You've instilled a certain culture from Karen Aston and Jamie Carey and Cam Miles and all the staff that have stayed around Coach Aston. It's just been it's been really interesting just to see how it's really bled into the players, and they have transferred that over to the young players as they come in. You hear this from the football team,
Mm-hmm.
and we've seen the success that Jeff Traylor has had. Now you're seeing the parallels here between the women's basketball team and how they've gotten that culture and they've continued it. So let's talk a little bit about some of the roster highlights since the last time that we updated everyone on the pod. Begins with Jordan Jenkins, right?
Yeah, everything kind of starts and ends with Jordan. She has been such a consistent player this season. I think she's gotten more American Player of the Week accolades than I could possibly count, averaging 18.8 points per game. You know, her presence, her leadership has just been really important to this team and has really helped as they've continued to develop, like you mentioned. Unfortunately, she did sustain an injury at the end of the Tulsa game and had to miss the South Florida game. We'll kind of talk about how that impacted the team, but fortunately, she was able to return this weekend and was in the starting lineup against Temple. She's really made a lot of improvements. Particularly, I think you wanted to talk about on defense, the things that she's done differently this season that have impacted the girls.
So I'm going to go back to something you said about her and her AAC Player of the Week honors. I mean, first of all, I know somebody had said it, and I don't remember where, but let's just rename it the Jordan Jenkins AAC Player of the Week award
Right.
at this point, right? But you also highlighted a lot of the offensive things that she's done. I, like you said, wanted to talk a little about a defensive things that she's done, because when they unleash this press, and Coach Aston is very strategic and situational about when she does so, when they unleash it, and they unleashed it yesterday, Jordan Jenkins is the head of that defensive snake, so to speak. And when it strikes badly at opponents, because Jordan has a knack to me of just like finding a way to deflect the ball or to time really her defensive, really moving her hands, moving her arms. And it's interesting to see, because all we talk about is the offensive impact that Jordan Jenkins does. But for me to see really more of that growth, we've kind of talked about with Coach Aston before, is, do you really think that Jordan is a WNBA player? And she said, well, she can be. She's just got to want that, and she seems to really want that desire. This is how you do it. You start playing better defense, and you really sink in, and it really feels like she's really taken it to heart. And I think the team around her is what has gotten her playing better defense. Not that she was like a terrible defender, like I'm not trying to say that, but everybody can improve.
Yeah.
Let's move on to, I guess, another player that has really, I think, sparked me, and that's been Maya Linton. And I just happen to be wearing her shirt right now with her number on it. We actually got to say, really nice of her to talk to us at one of the last basketball radio shows. Even talked a little bit with Coach Jamie Carey, and it was just kind of hearing just that growth that Maya's had. And that's because she made the change from being a post player to now being a wing. And that's not an easy thing. She's played all her life, like with her back to the basket. Now she has to face up to the basket. And That sounds easy, but it's not. I mean, it sounds easy if it's just me like going out there and shooting and playing with, some other guys my age, and we're just running down the court like jerks, just trying to throw the ball around, trying to make baskets. But this is college basketball. This is a higher level, and for Maya to make that transition has just been, I think, big for this team, especially that defensive role. She has been that defensive stopper that we needed after Kira White had left, and Maya has embraced it. And again, we're seeing benefits because of some of the adjustments that the coaching staff and the players are making.
Yeah, the other person who has really stepped up this year has been new player to the team, Nina De Leon Negron, coming in as that point guard. She's kind of feeling that other piece that was missing after Kira White graduated. She's a true point guard, unlike Kira and Sydney, who are both combo guards who've been kind of playing that role over the last year. She's been able to come in and just her veteran leadership, I think, has been one of the key pieces that's really helped to this team. And a lot of times that's really hard for somebody to come in from the outside and to be able to offer that leadership with a team that has been as cohesive as we've seen at UTSA, particularly when there's someone like Nina who played against the team a couple of years ago and really was just a thorn in our side in that loss. So then to be able to come in and, not only be somebody from the outside, but somebody that they probably have memories of and not in a fond way, and be able to come in and kind of offer that leadership. I think that's been really important. And the first thing we said when we saw her was, oh, she's a firecracker.
Yeah.
You can just tell that she commands that group. She's not afraid to speak up. And I think that's just one of those things that, that was a void after Kira left. And now she's come in, she's averaging 10.6 points per game. There's been a couple of games where she's been the leading scorer. And I think it's just been a really key part of this season.
She has, and it's elevated, I think, the players around her. And I think that was the other part to it wasn't just her leadership, it's just her elevating everyone. And it just feels like everybody's much more comfortable on the court. And it's because of her. I just want to highlight one more player. It's Cheyenne Rowe. She's had a nice 3-game stretch. She's averaging about 12 points per game, but there's been this, she's just come in and she's just played well and she's played smart. I think in previous years at times, she'd get some silly fouls, and so would other players on the team, but it felt like with Cheyenne, she'd get some silly fouls and it would get her back on the bench instead of being able to contribute. And now she just seems like she's really settling into a nice, really supportive role for this team. And the reason I really also wanted to call out Cheyenne is, I really feel like she continues to just improve her game. And I talked about, like, you get a post into the UTSA program, just let them have a season with, Cam Miles, and you're going to see a difference. And I think you're just seeing differences from, Cheyenne Rowe as she continues to mature. And you see that time that she spent with, Coach Miles and how he's continuing to get her to grow. It's just, again, we're lucky to have some of these coaches and they stick around with Coach Aston. And this right here is a product of said development.
Yeah, unfortunately, one other thing to mention is just that Nia Goni, unfortunately, is out for the rest of the season with injury. Really looked like a very promising player at the beginning of the season. Really liked her length, but unfortunately, these things happen, and the team has been able to kind of rally around each other and, has been able to kind of pick up the production that she was bringing.
And really, we talk about Cheyenne Rowe. She's, I think, filled that role I think that Nia was going to fill, and she's done it well. So let's see hopefully the girls continue to improve and see where they go. But let's review since the last time we updated some of the games that have been played, and then we'll kind of pick out a couple of games and kind of talk about how that relates to the last 2 games for UTSA.
Yeah, so the last update we gave, we had just played our first conference game at Charlotte. So since then, we came home against UAB. We won that game 67-56. Then we went to Tulsa, won that game 60-53. Came back home to Rice, won that game 67-58. Again at home, Wichita State had a doubleheader against Wichita State, men's and women's, won that game 69-51. Went to Memphis. We'll get into what happened there. Tightest game so far, but we came through with a win, 70-68. Again on the road against UAB, won that game 73-63. Came back home against Tulsa, had a win 64-53. And then unfortunately, the game we mentioned earlier, South Florida, we were away without Jordan. We have a loss 63-75. Came back this weekend against Temple and came from behind to win 70-61.
So I did put out from our account, I tweeted out and skeeted some really a preview to the USF game, because South Florida and Temple to me are the kind of cream of the crop this year.
Mm-hmm.
I know that North Texas is up there, and we'll get into that North Texas game here in a little bit, but I tweeted out really those previews because I wanted to see just if that helped. And if that did, let us know. But for the most part is I really wanted to highlight the issues that South Florida was going to give UTSA. We knew they were. And they did. And I think some of it, the team kind of talked about the fact that they had some problems against South Florida, that they didn't seem like they were in it. They just seemed like they were they kind of went through the motions, I guess, in some way, and they weren't as together as they should have been. And it was interesting because you look back at a game like Rice, where they had a slow start, but they come back. Sydney Love is out for that game. They had a little bit of sloppy play, but they end up overcoming Rice. And then Memphis, you talked about how it was a close game. There was just a bad situational moment for Memphis, and that's how UTSA pulls away. That's what I expected from South Florida, is I felt like we could overcome. But some of those things that I just talked about, some of those situational things that we were able to do against Memphis and Rice, and even at home against Tulsa when they were chipping away at our lead, it was capitalized to me really at the end of the third quarter of the South Florida game, because we make a stop and Sydney's drive is essentially dribbling up the court. It's 5-on-4. But neither the team alerts Sydney that Carla Brito is coming from behind her, nor does she have the awareness to say, wait a second, there's 4 in front of me. There's 4 South Florida players in front of me. Where's the 5th one, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that wasn't lacking in again the game against Temple yesterday, but against South Florida it was. And Carla Brito picks Sydney's pocket. We go back the other way. Carla Brito gets an easy layup. And now, instead of chipping away at that lead, going into the fourth and really being able to have a chance to make a run, it felt like that just deflated the team. Like
Mm-hmm.
that did it. So, the more we look at about it, I think maybe that was kind of needed. And there was, I think, one game you could drop. And I mean, there's so many games. I think going undefeated is just difficult enough, especially in basketball. But my concern was yesterday was Temple. Temple, I think, presented a big problem because last year they really gave UTSA a hard time because of the fact that they just seemed to have those guards that were able to get UTSA out of their game. And we essentially got blown out both games.
Yeah. And, we talk about that winning streak that we're on right now. The last time we lost at the Convo was last year to Temple.
Right.
And of course, when I see that article come out from Jerry Briggs yesterday before the game, I was like, Jerry, why are we putting out the negative vibes? And then the game kind of starts we're a little off at the beginning. And I thought, okay, this is not good. Not to mention one of the funny things that happened before we get into kind of talking more about what happened in the game.
Oh, yeah.
We get to the Convo, like I said, I'm worried about the vibes from the fact that Temple is the last team that we've lost to or beat us in the Convo. We get there and paint falls from the ceiling onto the court right before tip off, right in front of us. And, we're trying to get the attention of the refs. The band notices the same thing we do. They're trying to help kind of get attention of the refs. And we finally do. And, then she's trying to get the paint chips that are, it's actually a fairly large pile. She's trying to get them off of the court. And so she tells Toves, like, hey, get over here and help me. So you kind of have this funny moment where the ref and Toves are like using their feet because, there's not the kid with the broom around like there usually is, So we're trying to clear off, all of this paint, and everyone else is sort of oblivious to what's going on. They're about to tip off, but it was just kind of one of those moments where I thought, okay, I don't know that this is a good sign right now.
Well, and here's the thing. The ref came over and said, hey, come over here and help me. And I was like, okay, I was going to just do it by myself, but I didn't want to seem like I was like rushing the court or doing something weird, right? I mean,
those
not
very
like
scary security guards
Yeah.
would have tried to stop you, and that you would have been able to evade them very easily.
Well, sure, but
we may never have courtside tickets again after that, though.
But I mean, the thing is that it was the safety of the players, right?
Right.
This wasn't just about UTSA; it was about Temple as well. And so when I went over there, I said, like, I just want to make it seem like I wasn't like trying to do something funny, and she told me fair enough. And so there we were, just kind of kicking the paint to the side, and I was gonna post a picture of me on the court on Instagram, and then maybe on it's Twitter, Blue Sky, or whatever. But I held back because I was like, well, I don't want to. We shouldn't really make it seem like there's like combo is that big of a problem. But it's gonna happen,
it would
right?
definitely become fodder for North Texas or Texas State fans, and that's the last thing we really wanted to highlight.
But I might still post it out and go, hey, check out why I was doing this. Though the picture makes me look like I'm one-legged, and I'm just
sorry.
Around.
I will do a better job of photographing the next time you have to clean paint off the court.
But let's hope that doesn't happen again. But really, I think what it comes down to is Temple, as I told you, the length of the guards really hurt this team.
Mm-hmm.
And UTSA really was trying to get the ball inside, and they couldn't because of those Temple guards. They really did a good job of locking up the passing lanes. They did a very good job of just trolling around. And you got to hand it to Temple. There's a reason Temple is, has won as many games as they have. They're a tough team, and Coach Diane Richardson is a very good coach. To have really, I think, beaten Coach Aston handily twice last season should tell you, that's she's quite talented. So I think Temple is just they don't have the point guard that they had last year.
Right.
Obviously I think she graduated, but still they had some really good guard play.
And we were getting into foul trouble. I mean, we had Adara, Cheyenne, Nina out there with 3-4 fouls. Sydney sat out, with foul trouble as well.
Quarter.
So I mean, we had to go pretty deep in our bench, and with Jordan, being in a situation where they're trying to manage her minutes, we really could have dug ourselves a hole, but it's a testament to those younger players that they were really able to keep us as close as they were, so that in the fourth quarter, when we were able to, kind of get those starters back on the court and tolerate the fact that they were playing with multiple fouls, they were able to pull it off, and Jordan made some really key stops defensively right there in the fourth quarter at the end.
Yeah, and that's really what I was going to get to, is the fact that we get into foul trouble, and you start seeing the young players that have not had that experience.
Right.
We're playing a big game here against Temple, because Temple was tied, I think, for second in the AAC at the time. So what happens, right? I mean, Temple comes out and shoots 50% both in the first and third quarter. That establishes the lead essentially for them. But in the second and fourth quarter, they shoot a combined 23.5%. And that in itself is big, because let's go back to what you had said, Nina, or I had said that Nina said, we don't have any bench players, right? And those young players came in, though they were doe-eyed on defense, they were monsters. Like Mia Hammonds, tall, lanky wing, and she was out muscling for some rebounds. And I think it's a 3, but it felt like the 3 key rebounds that we needed during that second quarter. And Temple really fell apart in the second and fourth quarter when they really could have put UTSA away. When UTSA gets in foul trouble, they could have just stomped their foot down and really blown this game wide open. They weren't able to. in the fourth quarter. They're still up by, I think, like 9 points going into the fourth quarter. They can put this game away. They are held to bad shots by UTSA's defense. Late in the game, it was because of that press that I talked
Right.
about, and you know, Jordan making some key, really bugging the heck out of the Temple players, and then Sydney having a steal. Jordan had a deflection. It just was insurmountable for Temple at that
Yeah.
point.
Cheyenne coming up with a big 3 point. We don't really see Cheyenne shooting 3 pointers.
Yeah. That was only her third one of the year, but
Yeah.
it was key. And that is, I think, as we kind of tie the knot here on the women, that's what this season has been. It's been a season of big moments, but it feels like it doesn't. There's not one player that we're looking at. It's Jordan on the defensive end. It's Sydney hitting a key 3-point shot. It's Nina making a key drive. It's Mia
Adara coming up.
Hammonds making
Yeah.
getting a key rebound. It's Damara Allen coming on and making it, making her defensive presence felt. Again, like I said, Adara Udo.
Just being consistent. She's really been that one player, freshman to sophomore year, who's just been really, really consistent. in
Her interior
play.
presence, yeah, was key. So it's just, you just start naming all sorts of players, and we could just go on and on and on about them. But I think we'd be here probably for 2 hours if we did.
Right.
Their next game is Tuesday at home in the historic Convo at 6:30. It will be on ESPN Plus, but we really do urge you to get out there. It's going to be a big game. It's for first. I guess you could say. It's really a chance for UTSA to extend their lead in the I would say in first place, and would give them some padding, I think, going into potentially winning the regular season conference title.
Let's transition to talking about the men's team. They're currently 10-11, 4-5 in conference, 8th in the American. To match what last season's team did, they just need to win one more game. So I think it's fairly likely to say that there's a pretty good chance we're going to beat last year's record.
Yeah, I mean, I think if you were watching earlier in the year, and I imagine some of you weren't, uh, this team didn't look like it would be at this point.
Right.
But much like the women's team, they've kind of had to go through some adversity, and they still are going through adversity to get to where they are right now. So let's talk a little bit about what that adversity is.
Yeah, depth has really become an issue. They're down to 8 scholarship players. There are 5 guys who have been out for most of the season and or are going to miss the rest of the season. Paul Lewis went out really early with an injury, planning to redshirt. Mo Nige will likely be out the rest of the season with his injury. Scuda Joseph and Skylar Wicks have been out the last couple of games for undisclosed reasons. And Jaquan Scott has been out for personal reasons, and it sounds like he'll be out indefinitely.
It's crazy. So that's 5 guys right there out of what we would say is 13 scholarship players. Atos, that's about close to 40% of the UTSA men's team. Now, let's put it in perspective when we were talking about all the injuries that were affecting UTSA football this season. And it was a much lower amount and a much smaller percentage. So I just take it in for a second and
Right.
think about if we're looking at about 40% of the UTSA football team being out injured, that would have been like 34, 35 guys, maybe
Right.
more, being out for the season. That would have sent that football team just downhill, right?
Right.
That's what should be happening. It's not.
Right.
And it should spiral us, but what it's done is it's compacted this rotation to those 8 players, and they found ways to battle and depend on each other to make key plays throughout some of these games. Now, again, it hasn't been perfect, and we're not looking for perfect, but we're seeing that effort is there. We're seeing that, offensively we can kind of mess around at times, and it's just not very clean. Same thing on the defensive end. But, it's working. Like, look back at the record. I mean,
Right.
we're seeing a better product, and we're seeing much more improvement than we have over the last few seasons.
Absolutely. Well, let's talk about really who has been the star of this team.
Sure.
Much like we talked about the women's team, there is, one player everything kind of starts and stops with, and that's Primo Spears. He's averaging 20 points per game. He's having to play a lot of minutes
Yeah.
because of these injuries. So he's averaging about 36 minutes a game, which is really, really a lot. And he's played every game. One of the few guys we can say who has played every single game.
And then let's move on to like Smurf Millender, who is the future of the team. He's a sophomore. He's averaging 12.5 points per game. Smurf's really been playing well. We watched the North Texas game yesterday, and I will say that if you watched it, then you are going to remember exactly the phrasing that came out of the North Texas color commentator, and he was saying, UTSA, you got to find a way to keep Smurf because he is your future. He is a guy that you can build on. And I've said the same thing. Smurf has really done a very good job this year.
Mm-hmm.
I think finding I would say his feet, right? Like it's, here he is essentially transferring after 1 year from South Alabama. He comes here, he's closer to home. It's an opportunity for him to still play big time, Division I basketball. And I don't know what his expectations were, but I don't know that I could have told you that I imagine he'd be at 12.5 points per game or that he would be playing good defense at that point. Two other guys that I think that are key here that I really want to mention, Raekwon Horton. He's been big defensively, man. Like he's just how these guys don't get in more foul trouble. I don't know. And that's kind of led to some Matador defense, right? Like we just had to let some not challenge some shots. There's just things you're going to have to balance, especially with just 8 scholarship players, right? And the fact that Raekwon has been able to play some really stout defense, his offense has really come on. I don't know, Atos. I mean, I think, I wish we had Raekwon for longer, but
unfortunately, this is his only season. But, it's interesting because Clonch had said that he just didn't feel like Raekwon was getting put in the right position at the first half of the season. And so he feels like we're getting Raekwon better looks, putting him in the right positions. He's really starting to come into his own. And what we're seeing on the court right now with Raekwon is what Coach Clonch said they saw back in the summer in practice. And, they're really happy with how he's doing and kind of how he's coming into his own the second half.
All right, I got to talk about this other guy because I mentioned him early in the season. I thought he was a player that would be good for UTSA, and I haven't been wrong. It's Genevius, quote unquote, Joe Smith. And I say that because I know I call him Joe Smith, and they'll say Joe Smith every now and then. But for the most part, there's a lot of, I think, when we go away from the historic convo, a lot of them are trying to say Genevius the whole time. So stick with Joe, everybody. It's much easier to say, and you can get to your point about how good he's been. He's that tall, lanky post that I've wanted for UTSA for the longest time, a guy that can, just run the court well, which he does, and can have an impact on offense and defense. And he's not a guy that's gonna really go down low and try to, put up 25 points a game. But he's also a guy that he's not going to give up 25 points a game. He is key defensively. And I don't know, I just loved watching him play. And he's an emotional guy. Like he is, there's a lot of emotion to that guy. And, he's been able to control it for the most part.
Yeah,
and,
lots of fire, lots of passion that you see from him. And, even though he doesn't necessarily score 25, 30 points a game, he consistently gets into double figures. And that's really what UTSA needs. They need a lot of guys that can get into double figures. Early in the season, we were trying to put all these games on, Primo's shoulders and expect him to score, 30, 40 points. And without, having people surrounding him, that just wasn't a sustainable model.
And let's be fair to him here, too, is that he's done all this without getting into major foul trouble like early in games. And I think to his frustration, he's had to allow a couple of easy baskets, but you got to do it. You can't get too silly. I think he knows just how important he is to this UTSA defense and really also their offense. He's been key. He's been able to step out and hit some threes. So That's the guy that I've really taken to. Again, I really like him for UTSA, and I really wish we had him for longer. But much like Raekwon, but it's just the way it's going to roll. But happy to see him be productive and happy to see him smiling. That guy. When he's got a smile, like I said, he's emotional. But when you see him smile, like there's just something infectious about it. So, hey, let's talk real quick about our Ken Palm rating. It's climbing, Toves.
Yeah, we're up to 209, which, again, that doesn't sound impressive on the surface, but when you consider that's the highest since 2021 when we were at 160, it's pretty impressive for what we've been able to do in a short season.
Absolutely, and we've been tracking the Ken Palm ratings. We've been tracking what UTSA is able to do. Toves, you talked about our record earlier. Ken Palm is predicting that we will go 5-4 the rest of the way. So, not that Ken Palm is perfect by any
Sure.
means, but it puts us at 500. Really, is what it would put us overall. And it says I don't know that I would have thought that 500 would have been possible with Austin Clonch. And if you had also told me we're going to have all these injuries and missing all these players.
Sure. Yeah. At the beginning of the season, we talked about the fact that they played some tougher competition than what we were used to seeing, in our non conference play. And I think that, and then just kind of trying to figure out this rotation, led to some games that got away from us. But, as frustrating as it's been, I'm sure for Coach Clonch and the staff with these injuries, they've really been able to kind of, like you said, solidify a rotation and solidify a team that really seems to be starting to gel, at the right time.
Yeah, and February here is what you go into March, right? So we're in about the middle, maybe lower middle of the AAC play, but it's much better than being really at the bottom like we've been over the last 3 seasons. So
Hmm.
progress, but maybe not where we would love to be at. But hey, look, if we can start here and start building, much like Coach Aston did, Austin Clonch is going to have a successful career here at UTSA. And much like we talked about with the women, let's update everyone about what the progress has been with the UTSA men's basketball team.
Yeah, the last time we talked, we had not started conference play yet for the men. So all of the games that I'm going to run through in the scores are all of our conference games so far. Started out with a really tough game away at Tulane. We lost that game 63-92. Came back, played Tulsa, close game, but unfortunately we lost that one 77-82. Then at home against Wichita State, that was that doubleheader we talked about earlier with the
Yeah.
women. Breakthrough game for us. We won 88-75. Then we go to Rice, win that game 90-84. Come home, play North Texas, a loss 57-72. Then go on the road to UAB, lose a close game there 78-81. Come back home against Temple. We win that game 88-79. Then go on the road at FAU. Started out well, but didn't end up so well. Lost that game 74-94. And then this weekend's game, we go to North Texas. We avenge our loss. We win that game 54-50. That game in particular, really important game for us, not only in terms of kind of building confidence, building momentum, but we got to play a spoiler. And UTSA always loves to play spoiler to North Texas. They were on a 6-game winning streak going into that game. They were undefeated at home, and they were tied for first in the American Conference. All of that is no more. And when you talked about Ken Palm, they had a Ken Palm rating of 60. So that's the highest rated win of the season. All the much better that it came at the Super Pit in Denton against a rival.
It was a great Saturday for UTSA basketball. I mean, we talked about the women and them getting a big win over Temple. And then, like you said, we go to Denton and win that game. And I think looking back at some of these games, you talked about Tulsa. We lost 77-82 that game. Primo goes off for 40 points, but nobody else really seemed to get involved. And it felt like everybody else was off.
Mm-hmm.
Like it wasn't conducive to what what Coach Clonch was looking for. So, I mean, we did our best and tried to just say, well, Primo's going to take us all the way, right? But okay, couldn't do it. We then played Wichita State. There was a scuffle in front of us during the game. Atos was able to hold on to the ball while all that was going on. So
Yeah, that was quite an interesting game. It was pretty chippy. And, it's sort of interesting because we haven't played Wichita State that much. So you wouldn't expect there to be, kind of that chippiness like you would see in a rivalry game. But man, you could, we sit courtside, so you could hear them kind of chirping at each other and trash talking the whole game. And then there's Scuda goes flying into a courtside seat at one point, and then you have the scuffle that you mentioned where this Wichita State player, there's a foul on Primo. He just kind of knocks down the ball, but when he does it and he deflects it, it hits Primo. So Primo picks the ball up and just throws it back, and I don't think he was really aiming to hit the Wichita State player in the head, but he did. And then the next thing you know, there's just kind of like a melee in front of us. And like you mentioned, the ball comes rolling towards me. So I kind of put my foot on it. And like everything was just right in front of us, happening very, very close. And it was just kind of chaotic, And then once you thought that everything had gotten resolved, they go off to the scorer's bench. Then the next thing you know, you see a UTSA assistant, like a grad assistant, and some coach from Wichita State talking, and the Wichita State coach obviously doesn't like what's being said, and he starts a lunge at the UTSA coach, and then all of a sudden you see the coaches kind of coming flying at each other, and it was just maybe not our finest moment, but at the end of the day, despite all of that chaos, we were able to keep it together, and that was a game where Smurf kind of had a breakout game, high score, 21 points.
All in the first half, by the way.
Yeah.
I mean, but really, again, you start seeing the players, I think, they'll make impacts, but somebody takes over in the second half. And, sometimes you need those handoffs. Sometimes someone gets hot in the first half, and then you get your closer to come in, which is Primo, or, you get some key baskets from Damari or even, Raekwon. But you start seeing, I think, what was starting to be built. And then, as you talked about some of these other games, I wanted to talk about Temple a little bit because we got out to a hot start. We built a cushion and, we put that game away. I mean, again, we saw that the team started coming back and, you think, well, Temple's going to do it, going to do the same thing that
Right.
Happened to us from Tulsa, right?
And Temple had come in, off a big win against number 1 Memphis. So, they looked like a really hot team coming into the convo at that point.
Right. So here you have this like moment where you're like, well, gosh, this team is right on the cusp, right? Again, they hold them off, go to FAU, and obviously that game just didn't happen the way we wanted to, but you're still on the road. You go to Denton, and we were talking about earlier, but it was huge. I mean, I thought that UTSA played like they wanted the game, not like they were trying to secure a win. It was more of, this is our game. We're gonna win it outright. Now it got close at the end because North Texas is a very good team. Like I can't go past that. North Texas is very good, but North Texas just they didn't respond well to Coach Clonch switching up defenses, and that really threw off their offense. And North Texas got really sloppy. They're a much more deliberate team. They come up and they're holding the ball for like the entire shot clock. They're kind of moving a little bit, just they slow the tempo down, hence why it ends up being 54-50. But they couldn't execute, whether it was the first half or the second half. And that is to Coach Clonch and the players to their credit because of the work that they did to get the win there in Denton.
Yeah, and Raekwon had said, their mantra for the week, Coach Clonch said this as well, was to embrace the physicality. And they certainly did that. It was a much more physical game that we've seen from them, particularly on offense, and probably their best defensive showing so far.
Really, it reminded me when he said that of, Coach Popovich when he told the Spurs in a huddle and it was caught in, national TV. Give me some nasty,
Right.
It was something akin to that. And It's certainly something that you want to see this team really take more defensive mantra to. But again, let's go back to how we started this entire men's review, and that's they're down to 8 scholarship players.
Right.
Like, they have to be judicious on how they play defense. They got to be judicious in how they handle things. And so certainly you may get frustrated with their defense at times, but the reality is that, man, with eight scholarship players, you got to do what you got to do.
Yep. So next up for the men is a rematch with Tulane Wednesday, 7 p.m. at the Combo. It'll be on ESPN Plus if you can't catch it in person, but I know they will be looking to have, as many supporters out there to help them kind of create that environment and, keep their focus so that they can get this win or at least play a much better game than they played last time they faced Tulane. Before we go, let's talk a little bit about UTSA football. Robert Henry and Willie McCoy are both returning to UTSA for their extra JUCO season. We hadn't really heard anything from them specifically, but we've seen both of them in pictures of practices, so we know they're both back with the team. I think particularly for our depth on the wide receiver side, having Willie back will be really important. And then, we really wanted to see that breakout season from Robert Henry. Hopefully we can fix the O-line this season and get to see in the offseason and get to see, that Robert Henry that we got to see, little pieces of last season.
Yeah. Well, we'll see what they can bring. And, we're hoping that, that because we've seen them in the pictures, that's really what it all means. But I think this is what we can deduce is that they are back. And, again, I would say that Coach Traylor likes himself a veteran, and this is why they would be back.
Yeah. Jamori Robinson announced that he is transferring to West Virginia. Martavius French announced he's going to Colorado. We learned Denver Harris is transferring to UNLV, and Eddie Lee is going back home to UTRGV.
Well, for Jamori, I think it's good to see him in West Virginia. Reason being, once again, it's a jump up. We've talked about before, jump up. He got some NIL money, and he's now closer to home.
Mm-hmm.
That's big. He's from the Virginia area, so gives his family a chance to see him maybe play in his last season. And Martavius French, again, a jump up to the Big 12. Both of these guys have jumped up to the Big 12 now, so it's a chance for him to be able to establish himself some more. Maybe get some film out there. Maybe stir up some potential interest from NFL draft or even the UFL.
We learned recently that Coach Griffin has left to become the running back coach at California. So there will be some staffing changes this offseason. Not exactly sure what's going to happen there. We also learned that Aaron Green, the assistant running back coach, is now at TCU as their assistant director of player personnel. So it'll be interesting to see whether Coach Traylor promote someone or if he conducts an outside search for that running back coach. Zay Frazier announced that he got an invite to the NFL Combine, so very exciting news there. Hope that he has, a really great showing at the Combine and helps improve his draft stock. He had a good game at the East-West Shrine Bowl, so hopefully we'll continue to see him, kind of peak at the right time and get some really good NFL looks.
Yeah, absolutely.
More news from UTSA will be coming out after signing day. That's Wednesday, February 5th. So our next podcast, we'll try to give you a little bit of update on, anything that came out of signing day news, particularly if there's any, updates on the coaching staff changes.
But mostly, we got to talk about the ladies because, I'm going to want to talk about our UTSA women's basketball team. So
absolutely. All right. Well, thanks for joining us on the Hail Married podcast. I'm Atoves.
I'm Toves.
We'll be back soon.
Birds up.